The lion's cub. Courage roars in Johannesburg. The morning light fell softly over the streets of Johannesburg. Dust swirled around the uneven stones and the worn edges of the old townhouses. Children ran barefoot along the alleys, their laughter carrying over the clatter of carts and the distant rumble of trains. Vendors called out their wares in melodic shouts. The smell of fresh bread mingled with the scent of smoke rising from cooking fires. In the midst of this ordinary bustle moved Thabo, small and determined, his bare feet tracing the cracks of the concrete. His sister, Nomvula, followed behind carrying the small bundle of blankets that held their few possessions. Tuberculosis had made her fragile, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. Thabo clutched a small carved wooden lion in his hand. Its mane was worn smooth from years of handling. He held it close to his chest as though it gave him courage the way it had for warriors in stories his mother once told. Thabo stopped before a large wrought iron gate. Beyond it lay a mansion that seemed almost unreal in the brightness of the morning. Gardens spread wide with carefully trimmed hedges. Marble statues caught the sunlight and fountains murmured quietly. A man stood by the doorway, tall and severe, his hands clasped behind him. Thabo did not hesitate. He stepped forward. Nomvula whispered, telling him to be careful. He did not turn back. His small voice called out, steady and clear. He asked for work. He said he would do anything to help his sister. His feet scraped against the steps, but he did not falter. The wooden lion in his hand pressed against his heart as though it were a talisman. He would not leave. He would not give up. The man at the gate watched. His face had known loss and hardened solitude. He had seen people come and go, children begging, grown men offering excuses. But in Thabo's eyes something stirred. He saw a reflection of his own youth, a spark of defiance, a courage too large for one so small. He could not look away. He nodded, almost silently, and beckoned the boy closer. The gates opened and the world of wealth and careful order extended its quiet invitation. Thabo stepped in and the garden welcomed him. The grass was wet with morning dew, and the flowers lifted toward the sun with gentle grace. Thabo's hands, small but quick, began to tend the edges of the flower beds, pulling weeds with care, moving through the rows as if he had always belonged here. Nomvula stayed at the gate watching. Relief passed over her face, but she did not speak. She knew this was only a beginning. Days passed slowly. Thabo rose with the sun and worked until the shadows lengthened across the mansion walls. His hands learned the rhythm of earth and water. He knew when a plant needed gentle nudging or when a root must be freed. Birds nested in the trees, singing over the quiet drip of water from the fountains. The garden grew in quiet harmony with his small, persistent care. Each evening he would return to Nomvula, bringing small flowers or berries. She smiled softly at him, the lines of worry on her face easing just a little. The neighbors whispered about the small boy who had entered the gates and refused to leave. Some admired his courage. Others questioned how long such determination could last. Thabo did not hear them. He could only hear the pulse of the earth under his hands and the steady heartbeat of his sister's fragile body. The mansion had other stories hidden in its walls. Portraits of stern men and women hung where the light struck their faces at angles that caught every wrinkle, every line of worry. Thabo would pause and look at them. Something familiar tugged at him. A locket around his neck, small and golden, rattled softly against his chest as he worked. It had been with him since his mother had passed. He never opened it, but it held memories and names he did not understand yet. Sometimes when the sun caught it just so, it glimmered like a secret waiting to be told. The man who had hired him observed quietly. He had tried to hold grief and memory in controlled spaces, but the boy reminded him of a time when the world had not yet hardened. He began to talk to Thabo not about commands or tasks but about stories, about the garden and the city, about the things that mattered and the things that slipped unnoticed between hands like sand. Thabo listened. He understood more than he could speak. He worked harder, not for praise, but because it felt like breathing. The neighbors slowly grew accustomed to the sight of the small boy moving in the grand garden with such purpose. People who had doubted him now nodded respectfully when he passed. Yet danger lingered at the edges. Tuberculosis took its toll on Nomvula, and there were nights when her coughing pierced the walls and rattled Thabo's dreams. The money he earned from the mansion was small but enough to buy a medicine here, a blanket there. Every coin weighed on him like a promise. He never complained. He moved through the days as if each moment was part of a rhythm he had always known. The wooden lion never left his hand. In the quiet of the evening, when the fountains stopped their singing and the statues sank into shadow, he would press the toy to his cheek and whisper words of courage he had learned from his mother's old stories. Let us move forward in the day. One afternoon, as he tended the roses near the fountain, Thabo noticed a small figure approaching. It was a gardener who had worked here for many years. His hands were calloused and eyes wary. He watched Thabo with curiosity and perhaps a small suspicion, but he did not speak sharply. Instead, he allowed the boy to move through the rows, showing him where the soil held a stubborn weed, where the water had pooled too deep. Thabo watched carefully, memorizing every detail. The older man had learned to trust few, and yet he could not deny the care with which the boy touched the earth. He was gentle yet precise. He spoke softly when he offered instruction, and Thabo absorbed every word. Something passed between them, a recognition that the boy, though small, carried a strength born of necessity. Evenings were quiet. The city outside the mansion hummed low and distant. Children's laughter drifted up from the streets. The air was scented with smoke and the lingering warmth of the day. Namvila rested in their small rented room near the gate. Thabo would return with small bundles of herbs or fresh water. They would share silence more than conversation. The bond between them deepened, not with words, but with presence. And in the heart of the mansion, a man watched, stirred by memories he had long tried to bury. Each evening, he found himself lingering in the doorway, seeing the boy who moved through his gardens as though he belonged. A quiet understanding passed between them. The garden was alive not only with plants, but with the weight of history and hidden truths. And somewhere in that rhythm, something tender began to stir in all their hearts. The mornings continued to rise slowly over Johannesburg. Light spilled across the rooftops and alleys, carrying the soft noise of a city that never quite slept. The streets held children chasing stray dogs and women carrying baskets of fruit on their heads. Smoke curled from cooking fires and mingled with the scent of fresh bread and baked maize. In the mansion, Thabo moved with quiet determination. He had learned to understand the soil, to read the way water collected in hidden hollows, to know which plants thirsted and which could endure the sun's harsh gaze. Each movement was deliberate, each task completed with careful hands. The wooden lion never left him. It pressed against his chest as he worked, a constant reminder that courage was not loud or brash but steady and unshakable. Namvila grew weaker as days passed. Tuberculosis settled into her chest with an unrelenting grip. She tried to hide her pain from Thabo, offering only smiles when he returned from the mansion. But he saw it all. He watched her coughing, her hands trembling slightly as she carried water, her body bending beneath tasks that once were light. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing deeper into his small shoulders. The money he earned was enough for medicine and small comforts, but never enough to lift the sickness completely. And so he moved through each day with quiet urgency, his small feet tracing familiar paths between the streets and the mansion, between work and the fragile life waiting at the gate. One afternoon, the magnate called him aside. The boy had been working near the roses, pulling stubborn weeds that threatened the delicate blooms. The man's eyes lingered on Thabo, not with inspection but with a measure of curiosity and recognition. He asked where the boy had come from, who had taught him such care for the earth. Thabo answered simply, naming streets, neighbors, and the little that remained of his family. His words were calm but carried weight. The magnate noticed the locket against the boy's chest. It gleamed faintly in the sun, catching the light in a way that seemed almost intentional. He asked to see it. Thabo hesitated. The locket was small and worn. Inside was a picture, faded but familiar to the man. The face of a young woman, a child. The magnate's heart shifted in ways he had not anticipated. He felt a tug of memory so deep it startled him. Days stretched into weeks. Thabo continued his work, tending to the garden with patience and quiet determination. The mansion slowly became a home not just of wealth but of care. Flowers bloomed under his hands that had once only known struggle. The fountains seemed to sing more clearly as he moved through the paths. The gardeners watched him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Here was a boy who carried hardship in his small frame yet moved with the grace of someone who understood life in ways adults often forgot. Even Namvila, too weak to travel far, smiled more easily at the gifts he brought her. A small bundle of fresh leaves, a handful of berries, a flower plucked carefully from the edge of the rosebeds. Each offering carried the silent message that life continued, that hope could exist even in shadowed corners. One morning, a letter arrived for the magnate. It carried news from a distant town, a name mentioned in the locket's hidden photograph. The words were slow to sink in. He read and reread, each letter unfolding a story of loss and abandonment he had buried long ago. The mansion fell quiet as he walked the garden, eyes on the boy moving among the flowers. Each step of Thabo's small feet seemed to echo the memories of a time he had thought irretrievable. He stopped near the fountain and called the boy closer. Thabo approached, steady and unafraid, holding the lion as if it carried the strength of generations. The man asked questions softly. Where had the boy been? What did he remember? Thabo answered in simple sentences, words that carried honesty and resilience. The magnate listened. His heart, long closed to tenderness, opened slightly, revealing the possibility of connection. The revelation came slowly. The locket had always held a secret. The boy, it turned out, was not just a child of struggle. He carried the blood of the magnate himself, a son lost in the aftermath of a mine collapse years before. The knowledge did not burst forth in dramatic revelation. It came quietly, like sunlight through the leaves of the trees in the garden. Thabo did not immediately understand. He held the locket in his hands, turning it gently, feeling the weight of history pressing softly against his small fingers. The magnate did not force explanations. He allowed the boy to discover the meaning in his own time. Together, they walked among the roses and fountains. The garden seemed to breathe with them. Every flower, every blade of grass held a whisper of the past and a promise for the future. Namvila noticed the change first. There was a lightness in Thabo's step, a quiet certainty in his eyes. She saw the man speak to him with gentleness she had not imagined possible. Her coughs continued, but her heart felt lighter. Thabo brought small gifts from the garden and set them carefully beside her bed. She watched the boy, her brother, move through the house with the air of someone who belonged in every corner he touched. The neighbors whispered that the mansion had changed. It seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. The people who had doubted the boy's courage began to nod in respect when they saw him tending the land, calm and unwavering. The streets of Johannesburg felt a little less harsh when the boy returned each evening, carrying the weight of responsibility but also carrying hope in his small hands. Let us move forward in the day. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Thabo found the magnate seated near the fountain. He spoke of the past, of children lost and promises broken, of the years of solitude that had hardened his heart. Thabo listened, silent and attentive. The small wooden lion rested against his chest, steady as ever. In that moment, the connection between them deepened. The man saw in Thabo the resilience of youth and the echo of his own mistakes. The boy's courage, once raw and untested, had begun to awaken something dormant, something that reminded him that family was not just blood but the persistence of care and attention, the quiet dedication to life even in hardship. Days blended into weeks. The garden thrived under Thabo's hands. The roses bloomed, the fountains sparkled, and even the oldest trees seemed to hold their branches higher. Namvula's coughs became less frequent as medicine and care eased her suffering. The magnate watched silently, feeling a gentle stirring of joy that had long been absent from the mansion. Thabo did not need praise. He moved through each day with careful intent, small and determined, never forgetting the fragile body waiting for him at the gate. And in the quiet of the evening, when shadows stretched across the garden paths and the city hummed in the distance, the boy held his lion close, a symbol not just of courage but of the quiet persistence that could change lives. Now we step into the next moment. The city outside continued its clamor, but inside the mansion a new rhythm emerged. A rhythm of care, attention, and silent acknowledgement. Neighbors began to see the boy differently. Gardeners spoke of him softly, sharing small tips and advice, passing on their knowledge as they would to one of their own. Namvila rested easier. The magnate felt the weight of years begin to lift, replaced by the realization that connection and courage could arrive in the smallest forms. And through it all, Thabo moved calmly, his small hands steady, his heart resolute, his wooden lion pressed to his chest as if it carried the roar of generations within it. The mornings came gently over Johannesburg. Light spread across the streets and rooftops, soft and golden. Children played near the alleys and vendors carried their goods through the uneven stones. The distant hum of the trains and the bark of stray dogs became part of the rhythm of the city. In the mansion, The garden had grown under Thabo's careful hands. Flowers bent gracefully under the sun and leaves whispered in the soft breeze. The fountains sang quietly as water rippled over stone. Each day, Thabo moved through the paths with quiet assurance. The wooden lion rested always against his chest. It was both a talisman and a reminder of the courage he carried. Namvila rested more steadily now. Medicine and care had eased some of her suffering, but she remained fragile. She watched Thabo from the window or the small chair near the gate. He brought her herbs and flowers from the garden each day. Sometimes he would sit with her quietly, his small hand resting gently on hers. She did not need words. The presence of her brother, moving through the mansion with purpose and calm, brought a gentle strength to her weary heart. Neighbors began to notice the change in both of them. Whispers moved softly through the streets. People spoke of the small boy who had entered the gates barefoot and unafraid. People spoke of the care with which he tended the garden and the patience with which he nurtured his sister. Even strangers felt a quiet respect for him. The magnate had grown accustomed to seeing Thabo in the early hours. He would watch the boy work, sometimes silently, sometimes speaking softly. He told Thabo about the history of the garden, about the plants and the soil. He spoke of the city in its quieter days, of people who had passed through, and the weight of mistakes that had lingered for years. Thabo listened carefully, absorbing every word, but never pressing for more than the man offered. There was a rhythm in their interaction, a slow unfolding of trust. The locket still rested against Thabo's chest, glinting faintly in the sun. It held the secret of bloodline and past tragedies, but the boy did not yet understand its full significance. He only knew it connected him to something larger, a story that was not entirely his own but intertwined with the man who had opened the gates. One afternoon, as Thabo watered the roses near the fountain, the magnate approached slowly. He carried a small bundle of seeds in his hand. He spoke quietly, explaining how each seed held potential, how care and attention could coax life even from the smallest grain. Thabo nodded, understanding not just the words but the meaning behind them. He pressed the lion to his chest and began planting with careful hands. He felt the soil's texture, the warmth of the sun, the whisper of the wind. The garden became more than a place to work. It became a space where courage, care, and memory intertwined. Namvila watched from the gate as her brother moved through the garden. She noticed the changes in him. His small shoulders held strength she had not seen before. His eyes carried a quiet confidence that was earned, not given. And yet he remained gentle. He did not command respect through anger or noise, but through presence, through consistent care, through a quiet bravery that shaped everything around him. Neighbors who passed by nodded in recognition, sensing the small boy's resolve. Even the gardeners who had doubted him now offered advice and shared knowledge, their tones soft with acknowledgement. As the days passed, the locket began to reveal its secrets. The magnate had learned through distant letters and faint memories that the boy he had unknowingly lost many years ago had returned. Each day, the realization deepened in the man's heart. The boy in the garden, tending flowers with such care, was his son. The recognition was quiet but profound. He did not rush to declare it, but allowed it to unfold naturally. Thabo's courage, determination, and innate understanding of life had opened the door to this revelation. It was not shouted. It was not dramatic. It arrived slowly, like the soft unfolding of morning light over the city. One evening, the magnate spoke with Thabo in the garden near the fountain. He told him small pieces of the story, allowing the boy to absorb them at his own pace. He spoke of the mine collapse, of his own mistakes, of the sorrow that had lingered for years. Thabo listened, the wooden lion pressed to his chest. He did not cry. He did not shout. He only absorbed, understanding the magnitude of what he had learned in the calm way a child can comprehend without fear. The connection between father and son began quietly. It was built in shared presence, in hands touching soil, in the stillness of afternoons, in the hum of the fountains, and in the soft glow of evening sunlight. Namvila sensed the shift in the mansion. She saw the man speak gently to Thabo. She saw the boy respond with calm assurance. Her own heart lightened. She rested more easily at night, coughing less frequently, her small hands less frail. The streets of Johannesburg seemed softer when Thabo returned in the evenings, carrying small bundles of herbs or flowers. Neighbors nodded quietly as they passed, sensing that something larger than themselves was unfolding in the mansion's garden. The boy had not only tamed the earth with his hands but had begun to awaken hearts long closed to tenderness. Days became weeks. The garden thrived. Each plant seemed to respond to Thabo's care, bending toward him as if recognizing the courage within him. Birds nested among the flowers and fountains, singing songs that harmonized with the rhythm of work and presence. The magnet observed quietly, feeling the weight of loss lift in soft increments. He spoke to the boy not as a distant authority but as a parent discovering connection long denied. Thabo listened, absorbed, and carried the lessons with him in his steady, deliberate movements. Let us move forward in the day. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the marble paths and shadows stretched across the garden, Thabo paused near the fountain. He held the lion to his chest and looked out over the flowers. The man approached and spoke of courage, of resilience, and of family, not defined solely by blood, but by presence, care, and commitment. Thabo absorbed each word. The city beyond continued its distant clamor. Children played, vendors shouted, and life moved forward. But in the quiet of the garden, something tender had taken root. A family fractured by tragedy had begun to heal. Courage roared, not through words, but through quiet persistence, through hands that tended soil and hearts that held space for others. Evenings fell slowly. Shadows stretched across rooftops and walls. The fountains murmured and the roses swayed. Namvila rested, feeling lighter in her chest. Thabo moved through the mansion quietly, bringing small tokens of care, tending the garden, holding the lion close. The magnet walked beside him, sharing stories of past and present, of mistakes and courage. The mansion, once a house of solitude, began to pulse with life. And in the rhythm of work, presence, and quiet understanding, something extraordinary unfolded. Not loud or dramatic, but steady, deeply human, and true. The mornings in Johannesburg held a quiet grace that seemed to settle over the streets and rooftops. Dust rose slowly in the heat, and children's laughter drifted from alleyways. Vendors carried fruit and bread on their heads and called softly to passers-by. The distant rumble of trains threaded through the city like a slow heartbeat. Inside the mansion, the garden flourished under Thabo's careful hands. Flowers bent toward the sun and leaves whispered in the wind. The fountains moved in gentle arcs, spilling water over smooth stone. Thabo moved among the plants, small hands tending every detail, his wooden lion pressed to his chest. Courage had become part of him. It was not a loud declaration, but a quiet force that shaped each day. Namvila rested more steadily. Medicine, care, and Thabo's presence had eased her suffering, though the cough remained a reminder of fragility. She watched from the small chair near the gate as her brother moved through the garden. Sometimes he brought herbs, sometimes flowers. He never needed praise. Each action carried meaning, a quiet affirmation that life continued even through hardship. She smiled softly at him, the lines of worry easing just a little. Her presence at the gate became a gentle reassurance for the boy who had carried so much responsibility on his small shoulders. The magnet watched quietly from the shadows of the garden. The realization that Thabo was his lost son had settled slowly into his heart. The locket that hung against the boy's chest glimmered faintly in the sun. It was small and worn but heavy with meaning. He observed the boy at work, absorbing the rhythm of each movement. Thabo's hands were precise, gentle, and determined. He moved with knowledge beyond his years, caring not just for the garden but for the lives intertwined with it. The man had spent years guarding his heart, keeping grief tightly controlled. Now, he felt a soft opening, a recognition that connection, patience, and courage could awaken dormant bonds. One afternoon, the magnet approached Thabo as he tended the roses. He carried no instructions, no authority, only presence. He spoke of the garden, of life, and of mistakes long buried. Thabo listened carefully, pressing the lion to his chest. There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, only quiet understanding, the way children absorb the weight of words and make them part of themselves. Each phrase from the man seemed to settle into the soil and roots around them. The garden became more than plants and fountains. It became a space where courage, patience, and love intertwined. Namvila noticed the shift in the mansion. The quiet gentleness that had settled over the garden reached into the rooms and halls. She saw the magnet speak softly to Thabo and watched as her brother responded with calm determination. Even the long-standing gardeners observed the transformation. Advice was offered more willingly. Guidance passed quietly from hand to hand, acknowledgement soft but clear. The mansion, once imposing and solemn, became a home in the gentlest sense of the word. Days blended seamlessly into weeks. The garden thrived under Thabo's care. Flowers bloomed in gentle colors and the fountains rippled with life. The boy's courage, once raw and tested in the streets, had matured into something enduring. The streets of Johannesburg continued with their clamor, the hum of trains, the voices of children and vendors. Yet inside the mansion, time moved differently. Each day carried a rhythm shaped by care, presence, and quiet resilience. Thabo's small feet traced the paths repeatedly, each step deliberate. The wooden lion pressed to his chest as if carrying the strength of generations. Evenings fell slowly. Shadows stretched across rooftops and walls, and the city's hum faded into the distance. Namvila rested easily in her chair, feeling lighter in her chest. Thabo returned from the garden with small tokens of care, each one chosen with thought and attention. The magnet walked beside him, sharing stories of past and present, of challenges and courage. No words were wasted. Every conversation, every glance, every gesture carried weight and meaning. The mansion became a place where family, long fractured by loss and tragedy, began to heal quietly. One late afternoon, as the sun bathed the garden in warm light, Thabo paused near the fountain. He pressed the lion to his chest and looked across the flower beds. The magnet approached and spoke softly of legacy and strength, of life endured and courage shown. Thabo absorbed every word. The bond between father and son deepened, not through ceremony, but through small acts of presence. The mansion, once a house of isolation, pulsed with quiet life. Even the smallest gestures, the tending of a flower, the careful placement of soil, the gentle care of water, became expressions of courage and connection. The city beyond continued its relentless rhythm. Children played, vendors shouted, and strangers passed by unaware of the transformation within the mansion. But inside, courage roared softly, quietly, yet powerfully. It was seen in the steady hands of a small boy, in the gentle smile of his sister, in the magnet who had learned to open his heart. The mansion, the garden, and the small family it housed became a symbol of resilience. It was not loud or dramatic, but enduring. Night settled over Johannesburg. The fountains whispered and the roses bowed under the silver light of the moon. Namvila slept peacefully. Thabo moved quietly through the garden, small hands caressing leaves, checking each plant. The wooden lion rested against his chest. Courage had taken form, not as force, but as persistence. The magnet watched from the doorway, feeling a quiet satisfaction he had long thought impossible. Life, even when harsh and unyielding, could be shaped by attention, care, and courage. Even strangers could become kin. Hearts long closed could awaken. And so the mansion lived with the rhythm of the garden. Days flowed with quiet strength. The boy, the sister, and the magnet moved in subtle harmony. Courage roared not in sound, but in action. It was in hands that nurtured, hearts that forgave, and lives that endured. The streets of Johannesburg hummed beyond the walls, but inside, life had found a steady human pulse. Bonds were forged, scars softened. The legacy of resilience began quietly and would continue through the garden, the lion, and the unwavering presence of one small boy who refused to give up. In the quiet of the garden, under the gentle stars, a story of courage and connection had taken root. It was a story not of grandeur but of life fully lived, not of loud triumph, but of quiet endurance. Thabo pressed the wooden lion to his chest one last time that night, and in the calm, gentle light of the moon, the roar of courage was heard clearly, softly, and forever. In the bustling streets of Johannesburg, 6-year-old Thabo walks barefoot into a world of wealth and secrets, carrying only a carved wooden lion and the courage to save his sick sister. His small hands tend gardens, his quiet bravery opens hardened hearts, and a hidden locket reveals a past that binds him to a family he never knew. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the quiet power of human connection. Watch the lioness cub. Courage roars in Johannesburg, and witness how one small boy's heart can awaken hope, heal scars, and turn strangers into family. Don't miss this deeply moving journey of love, strength, and unbreakable spirit.